Hey budget gardeners, Vita Loca here. Join me today as we divide and pre-sprout some Dahlia tubers. So let's go. April is knocking right at the door. Today is March 30th, and I thought I would show you my process for dividing some of my Dahlia tubers as well as getting some of them pre-sprouted. Now I have to admit, this is only my second year dividing Dahlia tubers. And there are a number of different ways you can divide your tubers. There are a number of different times of year that you can divide your tubers. Some people prefer to divide their tubers in the fall time. They feel that they can really see the eyes on their tubers within about a day after digging the tubers out of the ground. Other people like to divide their tubers during the dead of the winter when there's really not much else going on in the way of gardening. They feel that it's a perfect time to tackle dividing tubers. For me personally, I like to divide my tubers in the springtime. And the biggest reason is that's when the tubers start sprouting. And if I have a bunch of tubers like this one here, and I can see that it's sprouting in 2 or 3 places, then it's very obvious to me where I need to make my cuts. Now, my average last frost date is May 15th. So I still have at least a month and a half before I can even plant these tubers out in my landscape or out in pots. However, what I like to do is I like to start looking at the tubers, and the ones that are already sprouting, that's how I tackle it. I like to take those out and I like to divide them if I can divide them. And then I like to get them potted up and let them continue growing on and building their root system. I recently made a video giving you a tour of all the plants that I was overwintering in my garage. I'll put a link to that video down in the description below. And during that tour, I shared with you that I have 10 boxes of Dahlia tubers this year. That's a lot of Dahlias. And so my strategy for this year is to tackle the tubers that have already started sprouting. And so I laid out a few of them that have already started sprouting, and I'm going to show you different scenarios and what I would do to tackle each of those scenarios. Now over here is just a big tub. It's a cement mixing tub that I got from my mother-in-law's house. And in there is potting mix. It's potting mix that I made up myself, and it's 7 parts of peat moss to 2 parts of perlite and half a part of vermiculite. The vermiculite helps hold moisture or retains moisture, and the perlite helps drain any water, and it's just overall good for drainage. So I like to make this type of mixture up, and it's worked well for me. However, you can absolutely buy your own potting mix. And the main goal for this mix right here is just to get these guys to start growing, to start putting on a little bit of growth with the roots and the sprouting. And then eventually I'll put them in a better container that has some compost mixed in with it. But they don't need a lot right now. They really just need to be put in some sort of a potting mix so they can start taking off from there. And I'm going to have different containers that I'm going to be using based on the size of the different tubers that we have here. And I forgot to mention, I did pre-moisten this mix here. You want to make sure that you do that. You don't want to be using very dry mix because these tubers need some sort of water mixed in with the soil. But you don't want too much water. If it's too wet, you can rot your tubers. So be mindful of how much water you add in there. Okay, so let me take you in for a closer look. I'm going to show you some of the tubers that I've pulled out and what I'm planning to do with each of them. When it comes to pre-sprouting, no matter what container you choose, you just want to make sure that it has drainage holes in the bottom of it. And you can see based on my hands that this is a very small little tray. And this is perfect for pre-sprouting some of the smaller tubers. I'm just going to line the bottom of the tray with a very small amount of the potting mix. And you can see when I squeeze the potting mix that no water is coming out. And yet when I let go, the mix is just barely holding its form, which is perfect. We're going to start with a very simple tuber. This one clearly had fallen off at some point, but you can see that it still has an eye on it, and that's where we have some new growth happening right there. So I'm just going to place this tuber up like this. And I imagine if you actually laid this down, it would still send up the shoot going upwards, but I'm just going to place it like that so I have more room in this tray here. And here's another clump of very small tubers. I'm guessing based on the size of the clump of tubers here that this was probably one of my seed dahlias, meaning dahlias that I started from seed. And I'm pretty sure right there is another eye, but because this is so small, for right now, I'm just going to plant this whole thing as is. Now keep in mind, once things start sprouting on here, at that point, I can always take this out and I can divide this after the fact, once I can see that there are 2 or even 3 eyes on here. But for right now, the main goal is to just get this sprouting and creating roots. And here's another little teeny tiny one. You would think that these are no good and we can throw them away, but there is a little tiny shoot right there. So again, there's enough space in this container here that we're just going to place this guy right in there. And again, this is just a temporary home just to get these taking off so that the shoots can get bigger and so they all can create roots. Since this is pretty full at this point, what we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and cover these tubers up with potting mix. Now I'm planning on keeping these in my garage. I could bring these all indoors where it's warmer, but honestly, I have a lot going on in terms of seed starting, and my garage stays pretty warm. So I think they will be fine out here in the garage. And if I really wanted to during the daytime, on the warmer days, I could always bring these outside just so that they're getting some sun and some warmth. And you'll notice that I'm pretty much covering them all up. If you have it sticking out just a little bit, that's fine, but they're also fine if you cover them up. Good, one tray is done. So this one here is a fairly good sized set of tubers. You can see there is one set of eyes right there, and then there's another small one right over there. Now keep in mind, there might be more along the way here, but I'm only focusing on the ones that are showing me their growth. And when it comes to dividing, you just want to look for a good place where you can make a nice clean cut. And anytime you do this, just know that there's a chance that you might be breaking a tuber along the way. And that's okay. That gives us 2 pieces right there. In this example here, you can see there is some growth right there, as well as right there. And that's all I can see, at least for right now, are just those 2 places. And I always like to remove any parts of the stem if I can at this point. You just want to try to clean up the area the best that you can. So again, right there is the growth point, and the other growth point is right there. And sometimes the tubers will naturally just come apart if you tug a little bit. In there, now we have 2 pieces here. So we have enough room for one more in this little container. And the key is you don't want this to be too wet. Again, you don't want to rot out your tubers. You also don't want them to get too dry. So just check on them every so often. And as soon as they really start taking off and sprouting, I just need to make sure that they absolutely are out in the light, out in the sun, even if I have to bring them in on the colder nights or the colder days. And that one is all set. Here's the other half that we just worked with. So I'm going to place that in here. And this is a pretty big piece as well. So you can see one growth point, one over here, one over here, one over there. Now, could you take this whole thing and just plant this out in the ground? Absolutely, you definitely could. But I really just want to go ahead and divide it into smaller pieces. Even if I just took this whole piece and divided it in half, I would be happy with that. So let's see how far we can get. Again, I like to remove as much of the stem if I can without hurting the growth points. But if you did by mistake cut one of the growth points, just know that it's going to continue growing. It's not like now this tuber is dead. And oftentimes at this point, I actually just like to tug and see if this naturally wants to come apart. Sometimes that will happen, but I don't see that happening in this case. And I see here that I must have written down what the color was, but that's part of labeling. Sometimes you can't read it. I'm going to try to be better this fall about labeling all my tubers, just so I know the colors. And sometimes that happens where one falls off. And in that case, I'm not going to worry about it. Just going to go like this because I know that the neck was up here. And if it's meant to sprout, it will sprout. And again, sometimes the growth point falls off. That happened to me once or twice last year, and it did not harm the tuber. And anyway, there's still one growth point there, but this one should recover. So let's go ahead and place that in the tray. Here's another piece that we're just going to place in here. I feel like when it comes to dahlias, it can be scary, and there will be some losses along the way, but you have to take your chances when it comes to tubers. And I know with a lot of these, I have so many of them, and many of them I started from seed, so I have nothing to lose. On this one here, there are 2 growth points. And there might be better tools to use for cutting, but these work for me. These are just regular pruning tools. Okay, there's another one. And at this point, since this is full, we're going to go ahead and cover them up. I was surprised when I did this last year. I was so nervous and I felt like I was doing it wrong. I wasn't sure what was going to happen. And I had so many dahlias that had sprouted. I couldn't believe it. It's just a great way to increase your stock in dahlias. And it's really just a personal choice on when do you want to divide them, what time of year, as well as what size of tubers. These are pretty small. Some people might want to wait, but I'm okay with dividing them, even if they're pretty small. I saw last year, I still had very pretty, very large dahlias, even though the tubers were small. Okay, this one's all done. Now we're just going to use this 10 by 20 tray. This does not have any holes in the bottom of it. I would actually recommend you use one that has holes in it, but for right now, we're just going to use this because this is what I have on hand. And again, the only reason for having the holes in the bottom is for whatever reason, if you overwatered, then at least the water can drain out. But I'll be very careful about that so that I'm not overwatering these. I forgot to mention, now is a great time when, if you notice any of the tubers are rotting, you want to remove them. And right here, this right here is pretty shriveled up and dried. So I can go ahead and remove that. And I'm noticing it's just falling off. And same with down here. There's a piece that's shriveled. So we can remove those. And with this one here, this is the eye that's left over from the last tuber that we had split. We can just place that here. Some tubers are much easier to divide, some are harder. This one I would consider to be a little bit harder. There is an eye right there, and then there's another eye right there. And in terms of making a nice clean cut, I think it would be really difficult because I just can see that if I wanted to cut it, it would be somewhere in here, but I'd have to be careful of that. And so I'm just going to go ahead and pre-sprout this as is. And if I want to later, and if I see that it's a little bit easier to divide this, I can do that later. But for right now, we're just going to pre-sprout it as is. Here's another good size cluster of tubers. And you can see that the growth point is right there. And I'm just inspecting it. And actually, I'm not noticing any other growth points other than that. And in a situation like that, I'm just going to go ahead and place this in the potting mix just like this. And I'm not noticing any rotting on any of the tubers here. Again, the reason that these are all pretty small is because these were from seeds that I had started last year. And so when you do seed dahlias, the tubers are usually on the smaller side, but they will get bigger year to year. You can see a growth point right there, and I don't see any obvious growth points anywhere else in this cluster of tubers. So again, this is an easy one, at least for now. We're just going to place this in the potting mix just like this. On this one here, here's a growth point, and there's a growth point. Those are the only two that I'm noticing. This one looks pretty easy to cut because you can see, you have a tuber here, you have a tuber there. There's a nice open space here. There's a growth point, and there's the growth point. So if I can just cut along right in here very carefully, then I should be okay. Well, that was easy. Wouldn't it be nice if it was always that easy? So we can take this, place that there. And again, there might be another growth point at some point that's going to show on here. But for right now, I am happy with this. And I'm not noticing any other softer rotting areas. This one here, you can see there's a growth point down over here, and there's another one right over there. Again, I wish they were all this easy. You can see that we should be able to make a nice clean cut between both of those growth points. I have on here, it was white. Again, I'm not going to worry about the colors right now. I noticed last year that these bloomed for me pretty quickly, and once I see them blooming, then I can put them accordingly out in my landscape or in pots. So that's a nice tuber right there. And then this one here has that nice growth point right over there, and we're just going to leave the rest of the tubers attached just like that. I found this little tiny guy in one of the boxes. I mean, it's so tiny, but trust me, that will produce a very pretty dahlia plant. So we're going to get that put in the potting mix as well. This one has a nice growth point right there, and that's the only growth point I'm noticing. But while I'm at it, I'm going to cut some of this stem off just to do it. And we're going to place this whole entire cluster of tubers in there. Again, if I notice on any cluster of tubers, once they start growing, that there are multiple growth points on there, at that time, if I choose to, I can then go ahead and divide these down even more. Nice little small one, definitely not dividing that any further. But this one here, you can see it has growth points right there. And it's very small, so I'm not going to divide it down any further. I don't even know where I could easily divide it at this point, so it's better just to leave it alone and place it down as is. I swear, some tubers are just so bizarre and weird. I would call this a bizarre and weird looking tuber. But you can see right there that there is a growth point. That's the only growth point I'm noticing. It's just that one there. Easy peasy. There, and now we filled that tray, so we're going to go ahead and just cover it with the potting mix. I'm trying to make sure that the tubers are fully covered. I don't want the tubers drying out. I know that this is probably a little bit on the shallow side, but it will work for now. All tucked in. Well, that's a great start to getting the dahlias pre-sprouting. Again, I think if I had to tackle this project in the fall, it would have been overwhelming for me. During the winter months, I really wasn't motivated. And plus, I think it's better for me to do it in the spring when I can see the growth points that are starting to show, and I can take my time and only pre-sprout the tubers that have growth points showing. So I tackled a ton today, but I still have a lot more to do. But now I feel good about it. I can leave those as they are, bring them out during the day when it's warm out so they can get some warmth, they can get some sun. I need to just make sure I keep them watered. And then as soon as they really start taking off and growing, I can take them out of their pre-sprouting containers and put them into bigger pots. They don't need to be in their forever home because I don't know where their forever homes will be. The bigger pots might just end up being gallon pots or something along those lines. That's what I did last year. I just potted them up into gallon pots. And then when I was ready, I then put them out in the landscape or out in nice, pretty pots when I was ready to put them in their forever homes. I think this process works out great. I think it's nice because I feel like I can take my time with it and not feel so stressed out. And also, I have very limited space when it comes to grow light space this time of year. So I don't want to be bringing these indoors. I want to just keep them in my garage where it's still kind of warm and just let them do their thing. I hope this video was helpful for you. I hope it gave you some ideas. And I want to know, are you growing dahlias this year? And if so, do you plan on overwintering them or do they overwinter in your ground? I made a video in the fall time that showed you my process for digging up and storing my dahlia tubers. I'll be sure to add the link to that video in the description below in case you want to check that out. And as always, if you have any questions or any comments, please leave them down in the description box below. And until the next video, make it a great day with gardening.